This is Who Makes a Podcast? Conversations with your favorite podcast hosts about who they are, the shows they make, and why they make them. I'm your host, Chris Cookley, and my guest today is Brandon Hall. Brandon has been an emergency 911 dispatcher with the Metro Nashville Department of Emergency Communications for the last 20 years. He's been the calm voice at the end of hundreds of thousands of 911 calls, including for some nationally recognized events such as the Nashville Christmas Day bombing in 2020, the Nashville 2010 flood, and numerous active shooters. He is also the mind and the voice behind Music City 911, a true crime podcast where he uses his vast experience to talk listeners through the ins and outs of real 911 calls in an entertaining and informative manner. Brandon was a fantastic guest. He has a wealth of knowledge not only around the 911 system and how that works, and how he's able to obtain those audio files and use them to make a compelling podcast, but also on podcasting in general. He is really taking his craft seriously, and it's paying off. On this episode, we talk about how Brandon became a 911 dispatcher and what that job is like, judging where you are creatively now versus where you were a year ago, finding material for your podcast, asking your audience for ratings and reviews, monetization and diversification of monetization streams, and quite literally the cheapest microphone that you have ever heard of. I cannot believe he's actually using this microphone, but it sounds great, so maybe stick around to the end to find out what that is. For the full show notes and links to everything we talk about in this episode, go to whomakesapodcast.com/E24. And to find Brandon online, you can visit musiccity911.com. And now here is my conversation with Brandon Hall. Brandon, welcome to Who Makes a Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
I think this is going to be fun. You have a really interesting podcast, and I haven't had a true crime podcast guest on the show yet, but your podcast is a little bit different than the true crime podcast that people normally think of when they think of like a serial or a criminal. You are a 911 dispatcher. You have been for 20 years, and your podcast is all about playing 911 audio and talking people through that. How did you get into the 911 dispatching system? Like 20 years ago, how did you pick that as a career?
Yeah, it was actually 22 years ago. But when I got in, I had my last job, believe it or not, I was working at a tuxedo store, and actually I did tuxedos and costumes in the same store. I'm not sure how they came up with that combo, but
like Halloween costumes?
Yeah, just costumes in general. Sometimes middle of the year, some people would like to come and rent costumes, something that'd be more expensive to buy, and they would rent it for a couple of days and then come bring it back. But with that, I had a trip to Scotland scheduled, and I'm wanting to say maybe a week before the people that I work for said, I'm sorry, we just, somebody just quit. We can't let you have this time off that you requested, and I was like, okay, well, this is a pretty low paying job. And I was like, I'll just quit and then go on my trip and, have fun and do that. And I'll come back and look for a job. And when I came back, my dad, he actually he was a sheriff's deputy working the jails in Nashville. And there for a while, he was the safety coordinator as well for the sheriff's department. And he said, well, I talked with a friend of mine who is in human resources, and they had a job opening, and I think you might actually have the right temperament for the job. And I said, okay, I'll give it a shot. And within probably 2 or 3 weeks, I think I was in training, and it just sort of took off from there. And he was right. I've got the right temperament for it, I suppose.
I imagine that a particular temperament would be needed. As somebody who's not in that world at all, listening to the 911 calls that you play on your podcast, it feels like a really high stress, high adrenaline kind of environment. Do you still feel those things, or have you kind of reached a level now where it's, you're kind of unfazable?
Yeah, it's been years that I've actually had any type of real big emotions. I mean, obviously when you have a more of a hot call that you're taking, or if there's something going on the dispatch radio end of it, you can get a little bit hyped up and a little bit more excited. But for the most part, I've pretty much dealt with anything you can think of. Now I say that, and just like you said with the Christmas Day bombing, I thought I had dealt with everything until that happened. And that was the first for me. So, I mean, there's always something new that can possibly happen.
Did you have that as an episode on your podcast by chance?
I did. I actually made a 3-part of that. Once they started releasing more info, I obviously had some more intimate knowledge of what happened and everything, but a lot of that hadn't been released to the public yet. And as they released it, I could more slowly get some of the information out on my end. Yeah,
I remember that, waking up Christmas morning, and I found out about it like way later than I think most people in Nashville found out about it. I think it was like 2 or 3 in the afternoon before I heard anything about it. Christmas Day, we just kind of woke up and just didn't turn any phones on, no TVs on. We just didn't get any of the news. But that was a pretty crazy incident. So for people who don't know, there was somebody who parked an RV down on 2nd Avenue, I think, which is, it's right downtown Nashville. There's like a Broadway and 2nd kind of make a T down there. And that's where all the honky tonks and the bars and everything are. And he parked an RV kind of down in that main area, and at some point it blew up. I don't think anybody died except him, right?
Yeah, that's right. He was the only one that died. He went through, he was pretty meticulous in his planning, trying to make sure that anyone else didn't die. He had a message playing to say, get away from the RV, that it was going to explode. He even gave a timer that was playing over his loudspeakers. So it was a countdown, and it went off right when it was supposed to.
Yeah, that is not a typical sort of bombing situation. Usually they're an element of surprise and do as much damage as you possibly can.
Exactly. He picked the exact right time to minimize any external casualties on that, because Christmas morning in Nashville, especially here recently, because most people are not from here, so they leave out of the city to go and see their families or whatever. And he knew that at that time of morning, it would be probably the least busy, and there was hardly anybody out on the streets at all.
Yeah. Pretty insane situation. All right. So you are a 911. Is it dispatcher? Is that the title?
Yeah. Well, the title is emergency telecommunicator, but yeah, dispatcher works.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're doing that as your day job, 8-hour shifts, and then you come home and you're making a podcast about it. I mean, in some sense, it makes sense, right? Because you have all of this first-hand experience. You know exactly what you're talking about when you're playing these tapes. Do you ever feel like can I get away from this stuff, or is like the podcast something that you really enjoy doing still?
Oh yeah, I still enjoy doing it. With the podcast, it's a little bit different. I'm not the one who took the calls. I can listen to the calls and kind of pick them apart, like as if I was maybe taking the call, if I was going to do something different, if, they were doing a good job, bad job, and then I can actually do something I can't usually do at my job and look further into what actually happened and find out sort of a little bit of a resolution with it. Because most of the time when I'm at work, we never find out what happens afterwards.
Does that gnaw at you at all? Or have you kind of learned to kind of let that stuff go? If I got to call somebody who's like being carjacked or something, and then, the police handled it, or you let somebody know that it was going on and you're on to the next call, I feel like I would be sitting there like, what happened? What happened?
Yeah, there's a little element of that while you're still there at work. But once I leave, I try to turn everything off.
Yeah.
I was interviewed on another show I guess it was about a month ago, and they were asking about the same thing. And the incident that I was kind of referencing came, I think maybe a day or two before that, or couple weeks or something. But anyway, I was at work. It was the very end of the day. Some guy calls in and says that his brother is suicidal. He's locked himself in the bedroom and he has a machete to his chest and he's threatening to stab himself with it. So I get all the info I need. I start the police out there, and that was my last call today. So when that happened and my position got relieved, I just got up and left, and I didn't really have another thought about it until I was questioning about it. And I said, oh, that actually kind of fits. So,
yeah. Wow. Well, I guess after, 22 years and as you said, hundreds of thousands of calls. Probably can't follow up on all of them. There's not enough time in the world for that.
Oh, no. And in a single day, I might process between me taking the call or me on the dispatch end of it, doing the radio end of it. I might do, 200 plus calls a day. So there'd be no way for me to do that.
Yeah. So you decided to take this experience that you have and make it into a podcast. Why did you start your podcast? What was the idea behind creating Music City 911?
Well, I had a few people that had suggested like, oh, it'd be pretty cool if you wrote a book or something. And that wasn't really my thing. I mean, I've done some little short story writing, and I've been really into movies for a long time. And a while back, I did some short movie type scripts that I wrote, but a book never really jumped out at me. And
it's a big ordeal.
Yeah, it is. And just kind of my love of audio and stuff like that kind of helped me out. And I had a couple friends that had done some small stuff before, just in the kind of podcast-ish type world. And they mentioned saying, oh, you've got a really good voice, you should do that. And I've never, ever thought my voice was good at all. I'm just
it's definitely like that standard deep, maybe not standard, because there's like a gruff edge to it a little bit that I think lends itself really well to the genre that you've chosen. But you definitely have that deep sort of calming radio voice, I would say, for sure.
Yeah, apparently so. People have told me, and I've just never heard it myself. So, but yeah, I mean, I think all that kind of added up. And at first, me and I was trying to figure out a kind of angle to it, and I had no knowledge of podcasting at all. Before that, I probably barely even listened to a podcast. So I had to teach myself every bit of it. I had some knowledge of recording just from the acoustic properties and stuff like that. So I've learned that a little bit more as I went along and got a little bit better at it. And I think my episodes, they've kind of grown too. So it's worked out.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds really good. It sounds like you definitely do know what you're doing. And I listened back to the very first episode, and even that one sounded good. So.
Oh, it's one of the things that the older episodes, I think they sound horrible.
Everybody's more critical of their own stuff, I guess.
Yeah, I actually read something just the other day, and for any budding podcasters that are listening, this is something I think that is actually very good, very valid. I can't remember where the article was that I was watching or reading somewhere, but it said that anything that you did a year ago, you should be embarrassed by. And then the same thing goes from a year from now. You should look back at what you're doing right now and still be embarrassed by it. That way, you're always improving. Yeah.
No, that's good advice. Hopefully in that advice, they also said that you should be happy with what you're doing currently.
Yeah, I might be a little bit overly critical of my own stuff. So, but I mean, that's a good thing too, though.
Well, there's definitely, I think, something to be said for striving for doing better than what you have. I think it's Ira Glass that maybe he didn't come up with this, but I definitely have heard him talk about the creative gap, maybe where you know what it is that you're trying to do, and you know what good sounds like, and you either don't have the experience or the knowledge to make something that sounds that good, and there's that creative gap where you know what you want to make and what you can make are not the same. And there's just tension there. And it's always good to be striving towards, getting towards what you want to make.
Yeah. And with me, one of the things, and I guess most of it just kind of hinges around the whole voice part of it, because that is the majority of podcasting, is that I've got some pretty good headphones that I use, and they're centered around vocals. They're more of a kind of a upper bass and mid-range focused headphone, and they sound really, really, really good in that range. So
what are those?
I use the Sennheiser. It's they did a kind of a collab with Drop. It's the 6XX ones. Yeah. And I think it's modeled after the 650s, and they've dropped the price on the 650. It's essentially the same headphone with a little bit of a different color, but they're very comfortable. I can wear them for hours. They sound really good. They are open back, so there's a slight chance you can get a little bit of feedback, but I've got some very sensitive microphones, and I've never had a problem with it. But Yeah, with that, the whole point of that is that they sound like what I hear in my headphones. I always want to try to get that with my show, and I'm not quite there. I'm not sure if I need to actually downgrade my headphones to, I guess, make my voice sound fuller in the actual podcast recording itself to, so I can actually match what I'm hearing in my headphones.
Okay, that's interesting. So it sounds better in your headphones, like as you're just speaking into the microphone, than it does on the recording?
Yes. I mean, it's not like a huge jump or anything, but you can definitely tell a difference.
Okay. Yeah. I don't have any advice for you there. Hopefully you get that sorted out.
Yeah. My only two things that I'm thinking about doing, I do have way too many headphones here, and some of them are just not good at all. I mean, they're for, if I ever have guests over or something, I just, hand them some of those. But I think I want to try to find something that is more of a studio type headphone that is neutral, that you're going to get what you're recording out of it. And then if I can tweak my sound around enough to get it from that, I think that'll probably help. And I'm also looking at a kind of a more professional compressor, and it's got a few different things on there.
Some outboard gear.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which I've got that now a little bit I've got a little bit of EQ on my mixer that I use. So that helps some too.
Hey, it's Chris. Can I jump in here for a minute and ask if you have thought about making your own podcast? If you have, you may have realized there's a lot more that goes into it than you might have thought. Don't worry. I have a gift for you. I want you to have my podcast quick start checklist. From what microphone and recording software you should use to how you host and distribute your show, I'm here to help with all of that and more. My podcast quick start checklist will walk you through everything you need to know to start your podcast. I'll show you what's actually important. To get my podcast quick start checklist, go to whomakesapodcast.com/start and tell me where to send it. Now let's get back to the episode. So I just got, as far as headphones go, I got the Rode NTH 100s. They're a relatively new headphone, and I love them.
Yeah.
Good review from me. They're super comfortable, can wear them all day. I think they sound good, but I'm not a huge audiophile. So, take it or leave it. But I like these. I like these headphones.
Yeah, I've saw a lot of reviews on those, and everybody says they're pretty good. I've actually been tempted to buy them just to try them out. And also on top of that, one of the things they said about comfort, something about they have like a cooling gel in the earpads.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really good.
It's the craziest thing. You put them on and it literally feels cool around your ear, which is awesome for over-ear closed back headphones.
Yeah, I think I probably will buy some of those at some point just to give them a shot and see what happens.
Yeah, definitely check it out. All right, so you said that you don't listen or you didn't listen to podcasts. Do you listen to many podcasts now?
I do. Well, in my time that I can listen, and that's usually driving to or from work, and so I get about a half hour that way each way. But yeah, I'll do a little mix. I'll listen to a few different podcasts, some that I like, just out of entertainment, some that are for knowledge, and sometimes I'll throw on a different podcast just to see, like something in the genre, see if they are doing something really cool and like, oh, I could do something like that, or not necessarily copying, but, have my own spin on something that's good.
What are a couple of your go-tos? What are you turning on most frequently?
On my way into work, it's really a big mix. I don't know if you're familiar with the comedian Mark Maron. He has a podcast called
WTF.
WTF. I listen to his on certain episodes, just if I know the guest. And let's see, I do listen to, this is probably a big faux pas, but I do listen to Joe Rogan sometimes, obviously, with some of his guests, the same type of thing.
Hey, you and like 50 million other people.
Yeah, exactly. But see, the thing is that with all the people who listen to his show, I'm not sure. I don't know if they're all doing it or not. When I listen to 10, 15 minutes of it. That's really all I can do. with the time I have going into work, sometimes I'll do the whole thing. But
well, his episodes are like 3 hours long. I don't know many people that can listen to. If you're listening, I'm going to say this right now. If you're listening to every minute of every episode of Joe Rogan, you need to find something else to do with your life.
Exactly.
He has so much content.
Yeah, and he's got, I don't know, something like, 2,000 episodes now, and each one of them have been like 2 or 3 hours long. I mean, that's way too much time.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, I'm actually just looking through my podcast app here. I was on Buzzsprout for a while for my host, and they've got a decent learning podcast, just giving out different information. So if I see a topic,
I've heard about that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty good. One of our local guys, David Hooper, he does a podcast called Build a Big Podcast. He always has some good information on that. Same thing with Dave Jackson. He has a show called School of Podcasting. And, of course, Scott Johnson, with What Was That Like? I listened to your episode with him today, a little what I could, obviously.
Yeah, he was great.
Yeah, his stories are amazing. I mean, there's really just too many to list. And, kind of on back in my genre, I'll listen to, actually, there's a one out of, it's kind of New Zealand, Australia based. It's World's Dumbest Criminals. It's more of a comedy crime show, and it's absolutely hilarious. So I'll listen to that just to get a laugh or two.
Awesome. Do you have any any podcast host or radio host even that you kind of look up to?
Oh no, I've got several I've looked up to and do and did. I mean, I've in contact with a lot of. Mostly these people are the more true crime because we have kind of a community, I guess, and we'll chat with each other. We'll, even get on the phone and talk sometimes. I've been talking a lot here lately with Bob Mata. He's the host of Defense Diaries and just a super good, cool guy. I've met him a couple times, and we're doing a true crime live show in Atlanta.
Awesome.
He's one. Then, just several others. I've made really good friends with some of them that it's gone beyond just podcasting. We keep up with each other's lives and stuff, like Chantel from Lady Justice True Crime. She's in England. Never met her before in person, but I can tell she's one of the best people in the world. I mean, she's really, really cool. Yeah, just a ton of people like that.
The podcasting community is fantastic. People seem to be so welcoming and inviting to other podcast hosts, and everybody's just having, a great time making these shows.
Oh yeah,
that's great.
We could sit here all night just talking about other podcast hosts because there's too many to list. I could go on and on with that.
So speaking of podcast hosts, I said I listened to the very first episode of your podcast. You had a co-host back then, Rick.
Yes.
What happened to Rick? I didn't listen to your whole back catalog, so I'm sure that you covered this at some point. But as somebody who's just discovering your podcast, where's the co-host?
When we started the whole podcast thing, it was my thing, and I was like, oh, maybe I'll try to find a co-host because I didn't really know what angle I wanted to do with the show itself. And me and him had been friends, and we'd worked together for, over at the time, about 20 years or a little bit less than that. Actually, now I'm thinking about it, but between him and me, we had close to 60 years worth of experience because he had just retired with 40 years in, and, he loved talking just like me, and we both had stories, and we were like, okay, well, this seems like a good fit. And, that all worked out, but he was retired, and he's, in his 60s, and the whole demand of doing a weekly episode got to be a little bit too much. He wanted to be retired. That's all it was.
Yeah. No, I get that.
Yeah. So we're still, still good friends. We still hang out quite often. So there's no hard feelings at all between either one of us. It's just, he wanted to be fully retired, and I don't blame him at all for that.
Does he ever come back and do like a special guest appearance?
Yeah, he's come back over, and I think I did a 9/11 episode, and he read a couple parts for it. And, you never know. He might just pop back by at some point and jump in.
Cool. I want to get into your podcast a little bit, how you make it, how you find your content. So, on your podcast, it's 911 calls, audio from actual 911 calls. Sometimes there's audio from body cam video of police officers as they're interacting with people. How are you finding these calls to how do you know what calls to feature? How do you find those? And then how do you go about getting the access to that audio footage or that audio file or?
Well, see, for my show, a lot of true crime shows, they will find a case that they want and they'll research it. And, if they can get a 911 call, good. If not, it's not a big deal. They've got a lot of other information. They'll go on it. I actually don't do it that way. I start with a 911 call. I will look for calls that have been released publicly first. And, sometimes I'll have a kind of a theme in mind, I guess, for the show. And I will go out searching for calls like that, something that'll meet the episode theme that I'm looking for. And if there is something that's more of a new or a hot topic type thing, I'll see about if the call itself hasn't been released, I'll have to go through that agency and try to get a 911 call from them. I'll have to request it just like anybody else from any type of media source and get it that way. Sometimes I'll get the call. Sometimes they won't release it.
So when you say you're searching for it, like, is there a database somewhere online that you could just find publicly available 911 calls, or like, how are you going about actually looking for them?
I'd love if there was a database somehow with that. But no, there's nothing like that. I'll search for a lot of different things. Sometimes a news station will release something. Sometimes something will be released and put on YouTube or SoundCloud. There's 1,000 different resources that you can get these calls, but there's no one centralized database. I'd love it if there was, though. It'd make it so much easier.
Yeah. I feel like you have to do so much research to make an episode trying to find these things.
It's kind of hard to say that how much I put into each episode, but even when I'm doing, like my last episode was probably, I don't know, a little bit over 30 minutes long, something like that. And the research done with that, it was not nearly as heavy as some of the other ones, but in any given episode that's a half hour, 45 minutes long, I wouldn't be surprised a bit if I'm doing research, looking into the actual calls, the details behind them, all that stuff for, 10 to 20 hours sometimes.
Wow.
Yeah, a half hour episode, start to finish.
And that's just the research part of it.
Yeah. From start to finish, recording, editing, research, all that, I'd say at the very minimum, 10 hours at, average probably around 20, and some of the longer episodes much longer than that. I'd say 20 to 30 hours per week. I'm doing something with this show.
That's almost a full-time job.
Yeah, exactly.
You must really love your podcast. It sounds great. So it's definitely paying off. Boy, it's really too bad there's no database for that stuff.
Oh yeah. Like I said, it would make everything just so much easier to, or they made some sort of a government type of mandate that said, if you release a 911 call or any 911 call, it's going to get put there, period. That would be very good, but no, it's not going to happen.
Do you think about, I'm wondering how you think about, or if you think about privacy when you're finding calls to feature or finding stories to feature?
Privacy and exactly how, on which end, I guess, is a good way to put it.
Like of the people who are involved in the incidents or on the phone calls or anything like that. I'm not familiar with the true crime thing, so I don't know, like, if the stuff's been released to the public, like, it's just fair game, or if people, do people get upset if their stuff is used and they don't know about it?
No, it is. Once it's released publicly like that, that's just it. It's kind of, like you said, fair game. It's just as if, a news outlet, if they acquire a 911 call, and technically all 911 calls are supposed to be public record because you're calling for a public service, a taxed service that the government is providing for you. So it should be public record. That's what it is. But different states and jurisdictions have made laws that sometimes they won't release a 911 call at all. Sometimes they'll only release pieces of it, or they'll redact some pieces of it. But as far as once it gets released to the public, it's just like if a news station was to get it and they play a portion of it on their, 7:00 news or whatever, they're just going to play it out. And it's kind of the same way. It's just that my show will go in a little bit more detail about it. And, there's something to be said too, the whole being respectful for victims and things of that nature. I'm not generally a comedy podcast at all. I might bring in a little bit of something if there's a let's say, a stupid 911 call that I played, which I've played a few of those on the show, but for the most part, I'm just as serious as if I was at work.
There was an episode that I listened to. I hate to keep hounding the how do you find the call stuff, but for some reason it's just like not clicking in my head. I mean, I get it that you're just searching stuff, but there was an episode where you had like multiple calls about the same incident. And, the question that I wrote down is if they're like tagged by a case number or something, but it sounds like that wouldn't be the case. You'd just find an incident and then by chance you just happened to luck into multiple calls about it.
Yeah, sometimes like that. There are other times that it's one of the things I forgot to mention a little while ago. Sometimes a police department will put out a press release regarding something, just kind of a blanket type thing for all the press. And they'll release, I won't say every detail about it, but they'll release multiple 911 calls and, maybe a copy of the police report about it. It's different for each agency. And, of course, anybody that's out there, you have a town, you have an agency there. Sometimes you have multiple agencies in a bigger city. So it's different for each one.
Yeah. All right. So with, 10 to 20, 30 hours per episode at least to make it, are you batching episodes at all? Like, do you have any in the can, or is it, I have to do this week because I need to have an episode out next week?
Yeah. Most of the times I don't have an episode in the can waiting to go. I've done it before and I like the thought of that, but it's kind of hard to keep up and do more than one episode in a week.
Yeah.
Every single time I have more than a couple extra days off, I'm like, okay, I'm going to get an extra episode done and I'll take a week off or whatever. But that never happens. There's always something else going on that I need to get caught up on.
Vacations actually become vacations. Yeah.
Well, yeah, sometimes not usually though.
Your podcast has been going for what, 2 years now, 2.5 years, something like that.
Actually, almost 3 years. I think
almost 3 years. Okay.
I think my original release date was like December 20th of 2019.
And you say you're still having fun making it. How do you stay motivated to continue making new episodes? What's driving you to keep making your podcast?
Well, there's a few things. I do enjoy doing it in the first place. For the most part, all my reviews have been really good. Everybody seems to like it. Plus, I'm now starting to make a little bit of money from it, not a ton. One of my motivations, I guess, now is that because I like doing this and I can kind of see maybe, fingers crossed, in a couple of years, maybe if the growth continues to go like it is, that maybe I can quit my other job and do the podcast full time. And
yeah,
that's a good motivator for me.
So would that be the goal? Like you'd like to take it full time if you could?
Oh, I mean, if we want to be frank here, I'd love to be one of these super podcasters and make, $100 million. That'd be great. But no, that's not going to, I don't see that happening. But doing it right now, it keeps me so busy that I don't have enough time to do a lot of other stuff. And I'd love to be able to continue doing the podcast by itself and then open up some free time past that to do all kinds of other stuff. Not to mention, I think that if I had the extra time like that I could go even deeper in the research with a podcast, because, some of the other true crime podcasts, they will really dig deep into every aspect of the crime that happened. And I don't really do that. I'll have, 2 or 3 different incidents on my show. They're more of a quick hit type thing.
You said that people seem to be liking it and getting good reviews. I just looked up your reviews. I mean, you got almost 5 stars on Apple, 249 ratings, which seems like a ton to me for 2.5 years. I think I have 5 and I've been going for almost a year. So if anybody's listening and they like this podcast, please go leave a rating and review. How big is your podcast? Like, how many listens are you getting for each episode?
Well, I'll touch on your whole ratings thing here before I get into that. That's actually a very good thing. There for a long time, I was not saying, give me a 5-star rating and, leave a review. Yeah. I wasn't doing that at all until, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 months ago, I started mentioning that on the show. At that time, I think I might have had 120, 130. So, I mean, I literally went for, 2 years or so, 2.5 years with about 120, 130, somewhere around there. I think I'd have to look back, but since I've started mentioning that, I've seen growth with that almost every single week. I mean, this past week I went from, I think 282 to, no, I'm sorry, it was 284 to 292 in the course of a week. So that actually does help. So anybody out there listening that's doing that, please, yes, mention that at the end of your show, and that will help out with the reviews. As far as the size of my show, it's not where I want it to be at yet, but it's, I've seen really good growth as far as a standard 30-day download cycle. Each episode will get maybe between 5,000 and 7,000 downloads, something like that.
That's great.
Yeah. It's, better than from what I've seen most podcasts. I'm not trying to compare it all, but I hate to really say this. I'll see on the different podcast groups or something like that, the people are saying, I saw one guy, I mean, I love that he has the passion to do this. He's just had 1,000 episodes, I think he's done. And I can't remember exactly. I think he said he might get 150 downloads per episode.
1,000 episodes?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. This was a few months ago, but I see people all the time saying they've been doing it for, years, and they're getting, around the same numbers or even less. I think I was at one of the Nashville podcast meetups that we have, and I was talking with someone there, but she said she's been doing like a healthcare type podcast for, I think she said like nearly 2 years, and she had like 2,000 downloads total during that time. And, I wasn't trying to be boastful or anything like that. She asked me how many I had, and I was like, well, today I had like
last week
3,500 today. So yeah, but I'm doing, well, it depends on the week. Sometimes it really fluctuates anywhere from, I'd say 12 to 20,000 downloads per week. And overall, I'm probably averaging around 60 to 75,000 downloads a month.
Yeah. Well, when you factor in the back catalog, people going back and listening to previous episodes. Absolutely. Yeah.
That helps a lot. Yeah.
You're getting great numbers as far as I'm concerned. You're hoping to, someday or make this your full-time job. How are you monetizing the podcast? I know you have ads that run pre-roll and post-roll. Are those dynamic?
Yeah, they're dynamic ads. I've actually just now recently started doing mid-roll stuff, but that was, the dynamic ads, that's all I've been doing so far. And then I've got a small Patreon that helps out as well.
Nice.
And it's like anything past that, I've got a merch site that helps just barely. And on my website, this is something that if you may have heard on other podcasts, the whole buy me a coffee type thing, I actually have on my website, buy me a beer. And I've had a few donations through that, which is, always helpful.
Yeah.
But here recently, I'm my host now is Spreaker. And I've just now been offered, because I've kind of met a threshold, I guess, of their minimum requirements, and they're going to start offering some host read ad possibilities in there too. So, that should bump up the CPM just a little bit. And
yeah, I've heard that those do better.
Yeah. The dynamically inserted ads, they don't pay as much because, obviously you're not doing anything except for authorizing them.
Yep.
You're actually putting effort into making the other one. So they do pay quite a bit more.
How do you think you are getting those kinds of download numbers to your podcast? Is it all word of mouth, or do you have some marketing things that you're doing? How are you growing the podcast?
It's a little bit of both. A little bit of everything really. As far as what I do week by week, I've got, social media. I've got a Facebook page, and then I've got a Facebook discussion group that I've got now probably, I don't know, about 1,200 people in. So we go in there and discuss the episodes and can do that. I'll post on Instagram. Each week I will post in different groups on Facebook. Same thing with Twitter. And I do a little bit with TikTok as well, but I'm not seeing a ton of, downloads on that or views. I guess they say it there. The reason I got on there in the first place is I heard on a different show that someone, I can't remember what the name of the show was, but they posted something that went kind of viral on that. And their podcast download numbers went from like 3,000 in a month to like 60,000.
Wow.
So it really jumped up. So, I guess there's a piece of me that's wanting that viral jump there.
Yeah. If you could
just to see if it works.
If you could strike gold, once or twice, I'm sure most of those people are not staying around for the long term, but some of them will.
Oh yeah. And that's the thing. I do like my podcast, I guess is a good way to put it. I think that people like my podcast. It's just like any product at all. You can have the best product the world has ever seen. If no one actually sees it or knows about it, they won't buy it. So you have to get your product in front of as many people as you can.
Do you have any kind of like social media strategy that you're following? Anything intentional that you're doing? Or are you just, I'm going to throw something up when I think about it?
No, generally I'll release an episode and the next day or day after that, I will make different artwork for the episode and I will post that different places. Like I said, in Facebook itself, in different groups.
Yeah.
Some of them, like I'm in a couple true crime groups. I'll do some artwork in there and tell a little bit about my episode. Same thing with Instagram. And I'll try to use an app called Headliner to make an audiogram to do on TikTok as well.
Heard of that. I haven't actually gotten in and used Headliner yet, but I've heard that it can make some cool stuff. And is that free or free to a certain point, right?
There is a free version of it that I think you can do I think it's like 8 or 9 videos a month, something like that. And they have paid versions as well that get you unlimited. And I think you can I think I saw somewhere that if you do their pro version, which is, I can't remember, like $30 a month or something like that,
yep,
that you can actually go through and upload your entire back catalog. It'll make audiograms in your full episodes and upload the whole thing to YouTube.
Wow.
Which would solve a problem that I've had. I've been wanting to move my show over to YouTube too, but I was like, it would take so long to do every one of my episodes like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, YouTube is a whole different beast. I'm sure that it helps to have your stuff up on YouTube just because it's another touch point. People can find it and, find you through it. But I don't know how well podcasts do on YouTube if there's no video component to them. Like, do people use YouTube as their podcast app?
I think for some parts, I think they do.
Yeah.
I was chatting with, I'd have to think back now. It was another podcast host. She started as just an audio podcast, then went to YouTube, and hers is not it's not a static image. I don't think that any podcast that has like a static image does very well there. But she ended up moving to where she kind of integrates pictures. She's not on the actual show herself as far as her video, like a video of herself, but she takes, say, videos of, like news releases or just something kind of pertinent to the episode. And it's not like a real fast paced thing. Once every 2 or 3 minutes, the image will change. And the last I looked, I think she had 25 or 30,000 subscribers on that. And she's, grew that much quicker than I have with my audio only podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, 25, 30,000 subscribers on YouTube is definitely not nothing.
Oh yeah. It's, if nothing else, it's a good starting point. And granted, the way they make money is a lot different than with podcasts. I think with like the audio only, I think that if you had 25 to 30,000 subscribers on an audio only podcast, you would have a much better, foothold to get sponsors and things like that who will pay a lot more as far as CPM goes than what you get on YouTube, which is, I think, really hardly anything.
Yeah, I think if you're trying to find a ratio between podcast downloads to YouTube views, I think that one podcast download has got to be worth like 100 YouTube views or something.
Yeah, maybe even more than that. I'm not sure.
I'm sure that's not an exact ratio. Yeah, 1,000 YouTube views. Who knows? All right. So when you're making your podcast, like, what does a typical production cycle look like for you? So do you said sometimes you have an idea and you go out looking for 911 calls, or sometimes you find a call and then you build an episode around it. What does that whole process sort of look like? Are you writing out notes or speaking off the cuff when you're recording your narration? Like, how do you handle all that?
Yeah, from start to finish, I will, like just today, for instance, I released my episode. Actually, I made a mistake. Usually last night when I usually finish recording and I get all the editing done and I know it's finished, I will go ahead and publish the episode. And last night, I guess I was tired or something. I forgot to publish it last night. So this morning I'll wake up for my job at a little bit after 4 a.m. And one of my first things I do after releasing is I'll see how many downloads I've gotten overnight.
Zero downloads.
It wasn't zero, but I was expecting to see something around 1,500 to 2,000. And I think it said 400. And I was like, oh, there's something wrong. There's something really wrong. And I just forgot to publish the episode. So,
yeah.
But yeah, did that yesterday. I did my artwork today, but I got real busy at work. So I wasn't able to really post it everywhere, but generally a couple days after I've done the artwork and the episode release, I'll start looking for the next episode of the 911 calls, and I'll start looking. I kind of do the same thing I will do in dispatch. There's kind of a priority system for me. If there's something new and like a kind of a hot topic type thing, I'll go and try to jump on that first and, see if I can craft an episode with that. And if not, I'll go back and search. I'll think, oh, well, it might be a good time to do let's say a carjacking episode or a police shooting or, or a really kind of gruesome murder or something like that, that type thing. And I'll look for calls that fit in those criteria. And once I get that, I'll start researching the calls and what is involved with it, the length of the call. Most of the time I don't edit the call down to as far as making it shorter. I want people to feel like they're sitting in the dispatcher's chair and sitting there with the person while all this is going on. One of the kind of more saddening, I guess is a good way to put it, episodes I did was this woman she was an elderly woman. She couldn't leave her house while it was on fire and she ended up dying. And the dispatcher was on the phone listening as she died.
Jeez.
And it was a very long phone call. I can't recall exactly. It was probably over 20 minutes now that I'm thinking about it. So I played the entire thing start to finish because I wanted the listeners to feel like they were there, that they were the dispatcher. They are going through exactly the same thing that this dispatcher was doing. So
that's intense.
Yeah, it really was. There's been a few calls like that I've played on the show with longer audio. So I'll look for that. I'll look for the time and everything that will be in there. I don't necessarily want a very short 911 call because I want to have something a little bit more developed than that. But when I actually sit down after I've got my research and everything done, I will do a kind of a semi-scripted type episode. So when I'm going through, I will think to myself, okay, how's my intro going to go? What kind of music I'm going to use for the intro? And then I'll just start writing out some stuff, and I'll do, it's more like an outline that I'll go do. I do have word for word down there, but I'll on the fly change something.
Yep.
So it is scripted, but it sounds very conversational, just like I'm talking to you right now. I'll try to do it that way. And, I'll start intertwining all the 911 calls and my own voice telling about the details about the call. And like I said, I'll seek out some sort of a music for the intro, and I'll do all that. And then generally at the end of the episode, I'll do like maybe a promo or trailer swap with another podcast, and I'll air that. And then I'll drop all my links for social media and Patreon, things like that. And that kind of wraps it up. And then I'll start the editing, which I kind of edit on the fly too, because it's just me doing the show.
Yeah.
It's a little bit easier if I am on the show and I mess something up, I can just stop it right there and re-record it and just go that way.
So what does editing look like for you then? What are you typically doing?
Like I said, most of my editing is done on the fly. So if I'm going through and I mess up a word, or if I don't feel like it really sounded that good, I'll just re-record it right there and do it that way. Once I get everything done, I'll have to move the elements around some. I'll have to put the 911 call in the right place. I'll have to, here recently, instead of just having the intro music just kind of playing in the background, I've tried to make certain pointed vocals in different places that kind of align with the music correctly.
Yep. Very NPR there.
Yeah, trying to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been toying with having some background music playing through certain segments of, just me talking about the case as well. I haven't quite got there yet, but doing that. And then I'll do a few edits on the actual audio of it. If it's a poor recording, I'll try to use a compressor setting to bump it up a little bit and make it more aligned with what my vocals are. Same thing with my vocals. I like everything to be really uniform and not really dynamic, which goes against my own audiophile, needs and wants. Typically with audiophile recording, you want all the dynamics, but if I'm listening to a podcast, I can't stand really more than anything having to turn my volume up and down, back and forth when little things happen. I want it to be set at a volume and that's it.
Yeah. I think dynamics are great if it's music and you're trying to build up a swell or something and get somebody's emotions going with a piece of music and you come in with the crash and all that. But if I'm listening to a podcast and it's, you're talking at one level and then you're playing a clip from something and it's, 20 decibels quieter and then you got to come back to you, like messing with that volume knob. Like I'm not going to listen to that.
Yeah. And so, I hate to say this, there's, I've listened to other shows, the ones that really sound horrible. Like you can tell that they've got one microphone recording 3 or 4 people and it's sitting in the middle of a kitchen table with bare walls and, bare floor. Everything's really echoey and everybody sounds like they're sitting 20 feet away from the microphone.
Yep.
I'll turn it off. I don't care if you're telling me where $1 million is hidden or, the location of the Holy Grail. I'm not going to listen to it. It's difficult to get extremely good audio, but it's not hard to get decent audio.
Yeah. And I would 100% agree with that. It is not very difficult to get good podcast audio. It's just like anything else. You can get to 85% of something really fairly easily.
Yeah.
But that last 10 to 15% is where things get really, really challenging and really expensive, but it's kind of just not necessary for a podcast.
I try to make mine as, like I said, aside from dynamics, as audiophile quality as I can. Now I don't record in, I see a lot of people say, oh, you have to record in WAV and, sometimes you'll upload it to MP3 and, cause there's a huge difference. Really, there's not. As long as you're doing 320 or above on the MP3, I know if any
kilobits per second.
Yeah, exactly. If I know that there'll be some audiophiles that might listen at some point and say, no, you're wrong on that. I'm talking about the average person that's listening on, AirPods or in their car on the way to work. They're not going to hear that difference.
Well, the other thing with that too is like you upload your file to your host and there is absolutely no guarantee that when that host sends that file out to Spotify or Apple or Google Music or wherever that they're not compressing it.
Yeah. And I wouldn't be surprised if they were. I mean, they probably are in some point.
Yeah. The file that somebody receives to listen to is likely not going to be the highest quality lossless file that exists. Like they're trying to save their bandwidth too. So
exactly. So if they're streaming it, it's the same thing. They're probably dialing it down a notch. So if you're listening on some $100,000 speakers, which they do exist and they actually have some that are way more expensive than that even, you may hear a little bit of a difference if you go from MP3 to WAV, but for the 99.9% of us out there that are not listening to extremely high-end audio gear, it's not going to make that much of a difference if at all.
Yeah. So you have, as far as gear goes, I mean, you have the Sennheiser 6XX headphones. You said you have a number of other headphones too. What kind of microphone are you using? What's your mixer? You're using Audacity to record? I think you said that.
Yeah.
What's the whole signal chain looking like right now?
So believe it or not, this is something that's it might actually shock a lot of people because everybody says, oh, the microphone, everything sounds so good and everything. And that's, it may be the case. I don't know, but my microphone is a very, very cheap microphone. It's incredibly cheap. I've got in my room I've got right now, I've got 3 of them set up and it is a Zingu. It's the BM800.
Oh yeah. Zingu.
Yeah. And you can get these. When I started researching into which microphones to get, I was like, I want to find something that's like a really good bang for the buck. And I saw a video on YouTube that had this microphone compared with a $12,000, what is it? Newman or Neumann, however you say it. I don't know.
Like a U47 maybe?
Yeah. I can't recall. It's the same microphone they use to record the song "We Are the World," and it's a very expensive microphone. Like I said, it's like $12,000 for it. And they did a side-by-side comparison on it. And for your normal vocal range, when you're not screaming or anything like that, it's almost identical. So they're both condenser mics.
Condensers.
Yeah. And so they do pick up absolutely everything. And I think that's one of the things that really helps with this is the fact that it does pick up everything. So I got the microphone. It's got a pop filter. It's got the cover over the microphone, shock mount, the boom arm. The whole setup for one of these is like $30. And, you can buy, I think the microphones, if you find those by themselves on eBay for like, I'm not joking, like $5 to $8 maybe for the actual microphone itself.
That, seriously?
Yeah. Yeah, no joke.
I mean, you said cheap, and I'm thinking like $30-$40 for the microphone. You're saying $5 for that microphone?
Yeah, like seriously, the entire setup on Amazon, like I said, with the pop filter, the cover for the microphone, shock mount, boom arm, all of those, all together, $30.
That's insane.
Yeah. So now like I said, they are condenser style microphone. A lot of people won't like that because they do pick up everything. They are XLR. And they do require phantom power. So that's one of the reasons I got the mix. Well, I got a mixer initially because it was me and someone else. I was like, I can either do what do they call it? I think Focusrite makes the
Scarlett.
Yeah, Scarlett. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to. The audio interface, whatever it's called.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they've got those, and I was like, okay, I can buy one of those, or I can get a mixer and have more inputs. And actually I looked at it and I was like, okay. And it has EQ and you can mess with your gain and everything. And it's like the same price, sometimes even cheaper. So I was like, I'm going to get a mixer. So I started with one that was I think like a 4-channel mixer, and it had 2 XLR inputs. And then I was like, okay, we're starting to, maybe have some more guests on every once in a while. And I did. And I was like, oh, okay, I need to have more microphones and more inputs. So I think this is actually a 12-channel, and it has 4 XLR inputs to it. So I've got a 3-mic setup going right now, and I can expand it to, I've got a couple other little lavalier mics, and I can expand up to, I guess, 12 microphones if I wanted to.
I'm still like shocked at the price of the Xing microphone.
Yeah. I will send you links.
I found it on Amazon, so I'll have a link in the show notes if anybody wants to.
Yeah, I'll send you a link, and I'll send you a link to the video I was talking about too, because it's pretty insane. Like at first I was like, there's no way at all that you can equal that. I mean, but there are differences. Yeah. If you have even with this, it has
to be, right?
Yeah. If you get loud, you can clip. It's the problem with this microphone is it has a very small capsule in it. So if it gets really too loud or hits kind of at a resonant frequency, you'll get some noise from it. So, but just very normal talking noise range, it sounds really good.
All right. So a couple quick questions then. What mixer are you using now? I know you upgraded it. I don't know if I heard the name of it.
Yeah, I'm using the Behringer. It's, give me a quick second. I'll look at it here to tell you the model number on it. It is the Behringer Q1202 USB.
Okay. And then you're using a condenser microphone, which is working obviously for you. Your podcast sounds great. Typically, most people advise against condenser microphones because of echo and reverb and things in the room. They're super sensitive. So do you have your room treated at all? Do you have like soundboards up, or is there just a lot of fluffy furniture in there absorbing sound? How are you handling that echo?
Initially, I did not have anything in here, but since I started getting a little bit more into it, I've done a few things. And there are a lot of things you can do on your own that's pretty cheap.
Yeah.
And this is where my kind of audiophile thing comes in. I'm not exactly sure which has made the biggest bit of difference. I've got a few acoustic panels that I've made. If you were to go out to a company and buy those, they're pretty expensive.
Yeah.
I'm wanting to say most places charge I don't know, about $150 a panel. And truth be told, if you have just a very, very minimal amount of woodworking, I'm talking about just cutting a couple boards. And even, I think if you do the measurements and everything, you can go to Home Depot and tell them to cut the boards for you.
Yeah, they'll cut them for you.
So you just essentially make a frame and you buy it's a type of insulation from them. You buy that from them.
Rock wool, maybe? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, actually, you can do that, or there's one that they make called Safe and Sound.
Okay.
That's a little bit cheaper. It's actually quite a bit cheaper. It's a little bit more easy to find too. The audio quality is not as good, but it's nearly as good. And then you just find something like a breathable material to put over the top of it. And I made a few of those. I've got really heavy blackout curtains on the window in this room, and on the actual door itself, I've got I've draped another heavy blackout curtain over top of it. Really, if you're looking on the recording end of it, if you can minimize any gaps at all, if there's a gap underneath your door, stuff a towel under it and it'll make the noise level of the room go down just a little bit. Just any little thing like that. I've even got, because I was having a little bit of trouble with noise from outside the window, I actually got some a moving blanket and I Velcroed it to the window on the frame of the window to give an extra layer of, I guess, noise reduction to the outside, and that's helped out pretty good too.
Yeah, there's a lot that you can do to kind of minimize the noise in your room, and even if you have a dynamic microphone, I would highly recommend doing something like. I moved into a new house a couple months ago, and I'm in a new room from when I started this podcast, obviously, and I haven't been able to do any room treatment stuff yet. And it's starting to drive me a little bit crazy because there's just a little bit of echo that I can pick up. I don't know if anybody else can pick it up, but I can pick it up. But, new house, and there's always other projects that take precedent. But
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, definitely, do something. I am planning on trying to build some of those sound panels like you were talking about, though. That's definitely on the list of things that I want to do.
Yeah.
I can get a couple of them up in here that'll help.
There are dozens of videos up on YouTube on how to do it step by step. It's really easy, and it's makes it a lot cheaper, too. Like I said, $100 to $150, I think maybe even $200 a panel anywhere else. And you could get a set of... I'm trying to think how much I paid. I've only did 3 of them. I've literally got the rest of the equipment to make probably at least 3 or 4 more of them sitting here in the room with me. But I think the total cost for all of it was maybe $100.
Yeah, they're not too expensive. You get some 2x4s. They're like $3 a 2x4.
And if you wanted to go a little bit nerdy and geeky level of it, there's a book that I've got, and I actually did this for my audio file stuff, not recording, but it does have a lot on there. A book called The Master Handbook of Acoustics. It is a extremely, extremely good book. It has a lot of good tips in it. Some of it goes way off the deep end, like how to really make a good recording studio top to bottom, the correct way to double layer your drywall and suspend using resilient channels, how to do those to where you actually have floating essentially walls and stuff like that. That way it's going to minimize any vibrations that might actually create extra echo or just tons of stuff like that. You can get real expensive, but kind of like you were saying before, you can get 85% of the level there for very little money.
Yeah, I might pick that book up though, because I'm starting with kind of a blank slate in here, so it's just kind of bare walls and some doors. So if there's any ideas in there that might help me kind of plan things out where things should go a little bit better, that might be worth taking a look at. Yeah,
it's not an expensive book. It's very thorough. It's I mean, seriously, like a textbook. So it's really, really, really boring, but I think it's cool.
All right, Brandon, I want to ask you, what is one of the most important lessons that you have learned about podcasting since you started making your podcast?
I'd probably say the biggest thing is kind of like I was saying before with something else. I see people online posting all the time. Be consistent with your podcast. Make it a good product. Have a good release schedule. Yes, do all that. But when these people are saying that, they're saying to do that to continue growth and things like that. And to a degree, yes, that may be the case. but you can't only rely on that. As I was saying before, you can have the best podcast the world has ever heard. I mean, literally every episode making people laugh, bringing them to tears, doing all that. If no one knows about it, they're not going to listen. So you have to figure out ways to, get people to listen, to grow the podcast, ask people every episode to share it with a friend or a neighbor or family member or something like that. Just anything you do, promote it every way you can. That's the biggest and the most difficult thing with podcasting, I think. And actually the most important too. If you're doing it as a hobby and you're just wanting to get your voice out there, cool. That's not a problem at all. If you're wanting to see some money out of it at some point, or see a good following, or just build a community, you have to do that. You have to actually build a community.
And then as we are starting to wrap up, that's excellent advice, by the way. Marketing, making sure that people are listening to the thing that you're putting so much effort into producing definitely should be something that you should be paying attention to. But as we're starting to wrap up here, what is something that you thought I would ask you that I did not ask you?
Oh, hell, I don't know that.
All right. Fair enough.
Yeah, I have no idea. I actually, just some of the questions in general, like they, really, really good questions. And I love that it's, listening to a couple of your episodes in the past. I love the format of the show. I wish that there was something similar to this when I started out, because I think it would have helped me out a lot. No, I don't think that there's anything else.
All right. Where can people find you? Where do you want to send people?
You can find me at my website, musiccity911.com, or really Linktree. I do a Linktree, and it's the same thing, Music City 911. That way you can go and find just, whatever podcast platform that you're listening on. You can go through there, and I've actually got that link through my website as well. So the best place is probably just go to my website, musiccity911.com.
Are your social medias and stuff linked to from the website as well?
They are. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Patreon, just really all the kind of basics. I'm on all those.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me about, what you do for a living, and then also obviously the podcast that you make. It's pretty intense stuff. I don't know how you do it. I'm super excited, or super grateful, I guess, that there are people like you that do that, because it's obviously something that we need. So, thank you for dealing with all of that craziness. And thanks for sharing your podcast with me.
Oh yeah, no problem at all. I appreciate you having me on the show too.
That was my conversation with Brandon Hall, 911 dispatcher and host of the podcast Music City 911, which can be found on all of the major podcast networks. Am I the only one that is super impressed by what Brandon does? I think it's incredible. You can find him online at musiccity911.com. My name is Chris Cookley, and you can find me at whomakesapodcast.com. If you enjoyed this episode, it would be an enormous help if you shared it with your friends or left a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now. And if you host a podcast and would like to be my next guest on Who Makes a Podcast, let me know. Go to whomakesapodcast.com/guest and tell me about your show. This is Who Makes a Podcast. I'll be back next time with another conversation with another incredible podcast host. Thanks for listening.